for all of us. It's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today. Today I'm talking to Phil Clement, Global CMO of Aon. Aon is the leading global provider of risk management, insurance and reinsurance brokerage services, and human resource solutions. Today on the show, we talk about his 12 years at Aon, how other CMOs can potentially extend their tenure, or whether they should be thinking about tenure at all, how Aon became such a global brand, how they deployed the use of sports marketing and the success that they've seen there with Manchester United sponsorships. And there's a healthy dose of fluidity throughout the conversation in terms of how you need to allow local jazz to occur for your branding efforts on a global scale, to an ensemble team approach of solving big, hairy initiatives inside of a large global organization. Well, Phil, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. You and I met probably, I can't remember, my memory's so fuzzy, but 13, 14 years ago when you were consulting to a company that I worked for at the time. And now you're in your 12th year at Aon. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, it was pretty straightforward, actually, Alan. I think at the time you and I met, you were working at one of the great Chicago companies. It was a company called Bell and Howell, and it's a company I really loved. I mean, I think it was one of the first multimedia companies, and what a great and fascinating engagement, right? To be involved in kind of I think that was their 17th life, right? And, companies kind of come and go, and these guys were really breathing new life into the firm again. And, that was the great part of consulting. You worked on a lot of different challenges and a lot of different areas. And, the other nice thing about consulting was you had to have immediate impact. Generally speaking, if you didn't really bring some value in the first couple months, your engagement was going to be over. And so I had a client, which was Aon, and really exciting place as well. There was an executive there named Greg Case who was running the show, and he was really responsive to the advice that we were giving him, and very much enjoyed working with him. And at one point, we did a little conversation where I was telling him what he needed was a CMO, and I didn't realize at the time he thought I should be in that role. And long story short, I ended up doing something that I thought I was going to do for 2 years, and now it's 12 years later.
Well, and you're really blowing through the tenure marks for CMOs, so congrats on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What do you think you can offer other CMOs that are looking to extend their shelf life?
Sure. I mean, I think that we talk about that number quite often of 23 months, which appears to be about the tenure of a CMO. And I think that changing jobs and things of that nature can feel pretty traumatic. And so it's one of those things that we really get concerned with. At the same time, having done the same role for 12 years, I mean, there are some great things about it, right? You really get to see your ideas set into motion, et cetera. But, it's not one of those things that needs to be overly, I guess, romanticized either. I think that marketing and marketing positions change a lot. I think the role changes with executives, and it's going to be very hard for someone to stay in a CMO role when chief executives are changing at a pace fairly similar to CMOs. They last about 12 months longer, and I think one of those things that you get to say is every CEO gets to change their CMO once, and that's why we're a little bit shorter in tenure. So all that being said, I mean, I think you recognize with the profession, there's just a certain amount of at different times, companies go through different life cycles. At one point, they might really want someone with branding experience. At another point, they might want someone that has really worked with sales forces. They might really desire PR or change in reputation because they've gone through some sort of reputational crisis. So I think when you get into that job, you just kind of got to expect that things are going to change, right? So that being said, it's just so important as a CMO to look at yourself as just another C-suite officer. So, some of the things that I caution some of our colleagues to is, they ask me questions like, how did you win in the budget conversation? How do you advocate for marketing in the organization? And, some of that is fine, but at the same time, when you've got that C in front of your position, you have to take on the responsibility as if you were the CHRO or the CFO. You can't be purely an advocate for marketing. You have to be a member of the team, be thinking about how the resources of the entire firm are spent, where the highest yield is, and where you can be the most helpful. And I think where marketers sometimes get in trouble is that they have ideas or a vision or plan that is somehow divorced from the strategy of the firm and the alignment of the whole team. And that's a way to increase your shelf life, is to work on those issues. But at the same time, I think it is completely fair to recognize that there's just a lot of change going on in the business world. There's a lot of changes going on in companies. These leadership positions aren't necessarily meant to last a long time. So I'm a bit of an anomaly, but at the same time, I wouldn't overrate that.
Do you think that your consulting background, I know you've also had other client-side roles in the past.
Yeah.
Do you think that helped at all to help you broaden your perspective?
Sure. Look, anything you bring into a formula definitely can have both positives and negatives, right? And as a consultant, the positive part was, certainly in my first, 5 years at Aon, I didn't really rely on the title or the position or the authority of the role in any way to get things done, right? I sold projects, I sold the ideas like I was a consultant, and which means that people had to sign up for the project. They had to want to commit and do things, and thank God it was a lot easier because they didn't actually have to write a check, right? But they still had to dedicate their time, their energy. They had to work on the things marketing was presenting rather than something else that might be in the middle of their desk at that time. And I think that's a really important skill set to never forget, and very helpful.
So Aon is a true global brand, and I'm curious what have you learned about managing a global brand over the last 12 years? I think there's so many different things on so many different levels, right? There's the nuances of how to operate in every specific country, which probably could be a book in and of itself. But I think kind of big principles are brands do translate. They really do translate across different countries and different cultures. You have to let the local jazz occur. This is a phrase that I like to say, because you think about. You give Japan a couple of notes, you give them a little bit of line, you give them some sheet music. You have to let them improvise. You have to let them work on what the emotion and the value of the brand is, and sometimes execute that in ways that may drive you a little crazy if you're overly emphasizing how everything's presented, quarter of inch, what words are used, and et cetera. The essence of brands translates, but it won't always translate in the exact same manner. So what we found was, we had to do some really big, exciting things that then local geography could translate. And the stuff that came back when people started to, improvise and have fun and add their own views to it was fantastic. Whether it was Japan, one of my favorite days was we had 3 soccer balls. That one started in Australia, one in Cape Town, and another one down at the tip of South America, and they all worked back to our new headquarters in London. And when the ball landed in Kenya, at our offices in Kenya, they had a 3-day festival. It was fantastic, and I never would have thought of how to use traditional dance to bring to life Aon's values. They did, and without some permission to create that jazz, nothing of magnitude would have happened. At the same time, if we hadn't talked to them about how our firm is really meant to address risk, how it's meant to empower people, how it's meant to create economic possibility for folks, how it helps with healthcare, how we feel so strongly that we would want to
bring an insurance market into the conversation, so the people who provide capital, also, community leaders. That's the framework we gave them. And upon that, they made it very, very real and local. Those are some of the best moments you can have working as a global CMO, right? I mean, those are just fantastic. So I would say that is one of the biggest things, which just happens to do with brands. The other one is just, we are literally in 120 different countries, and I think understanding how operationally different that can be, even when we definitely have a recipe for what a country looks like. A lot of companies don't. A lot of companies have pretty ad hoc structures in every country. We have really a playbook for a country, but even within that playbook, there's just a lot of differences and a lot of different motivations, and you can't spend enough time listening in any of those situations. And the minute you start to assume that something is being done for a certain reason, that's when you start to get things out of alignment. So I think that communication and listening piece is unbelievably important, and the bigger you get, the more important it gets. And unfortunately, it actually becomes more tempting not to, because it just takes so much time.
I'm just curious on the communication front, communicating what the brand essence is. I mean, how much of your organization's time is devoted to that? And maybe it was a lot in the earlier part of your career there.
Actually, the first thing we tackled was sales systems, because I felt like we couldn't do anything in a measurable way if we didn't have sales systems in place, and ways to really look at return on investment for a lead, or what kind of activity it was creating, and the impact of marketing programs. So it was actually about 5 years in that we got into really going big on the brand, and it was an all-consuming effort, right? I mean, we worked with a very good brand consulting agency. We had roundtable discussions in every country about the brand. We did a lot of things that was about consensus and helping people identify with the brand that maybe weren't necessarily technically required to do to get the project done, but in the end ended up being really helpful to getting people to feel like they were Aon, right? It was a great phrase that came out of it. It's "I am Aon," and people really expressed what that meant to them. And when the brand was launched, I would say that, and increasingly you see this in really effective organizations and marketing, it was a small group of highly dedicated people who were doing outstanding work. And I think with brand standards and relaunching brands, one of the temptations marketing organizations really face is this notion of brand police and enforcing standards. And the conversation kind of goes to that immediately when you start to talk about these things. And we kept saying to ourselves, and this was kind of the small group that we were working with, which was about 5 people, including a really, really talented creative director named Eric Saratowski, by the way. He's one of the best in the business, and I've been lucky to work with him for about 8 of the 12 years that I've been there. And we said, look, if it's good, people will use it. Fundamentally, we all knew people want good brand material. They want good material that they can be proud of. They want strong images. They want things that resonate. And we just kept going back. If they're not using it, if there's a problem with enforcement, there's a problem with the material. And we just have to be that good that people really want to use it. Now, on the other side, we had CEOs and CFOs in the business units who were completely committed to the value that's created by having a single brand. And so we let them do the enforcement. And that worked out really, really well.
That's great. I love that. I love that. If it's good, people will use it.
Yeah.
That's a big lesson. So what is the marketing? You have communications as well, I believe. So what does your organization look like across these geographies?
Yeah, and that's another really good question, right, about marketing organizations, because I think there's a couple of splinters that we always are fascinated by, right? One is business unit marketing versus corporate marketing. What I would then call field marketing, which is the stuff that's really close to the sales force, versus the things that are very close to global campaigns and advertising and et cetera. Then you've got PR, which tends to be, it can be a world within its own, or it can be within the marketing mix. And then you have internal communications. And you can organize, I think, effective marketing in many different ways. And we have, in my tenure at Aon, we've organized it different ways during that period of time based on what our objectives were. And so at times when, for example, the first task that I mentioned when we were implementing Salesforce.com and doing CRM systems, field marketing reported directly in. It would have been madness not to be spending 60% of my time with the folks that were using the system and working on the programs. And also probably would have been a real gap not to have the reporting accountability there so that people could be very clear on their goals and objectives. Now later, when we were doing more global marketing and branding, at that time I had more of a dotted line responsibility for the business units. And the business unit marketers were reporting to their CEOs because they were just hard charging on those plans. And I'd say, marketing at the corporate level was providing guardrails to the business unit, but wasn't providing that daily management. Similarly, investor relations has reported to me. It's not reported to me. PR has been adjacent. It's been mostly in the organization. I think you're going to see more of that, in the future because of content is such an important part to the marketing mix, and you can't really get away from content and PR being part of the marketing mix. But so I guess what I'm saying is it's a real puzzle piece. I'm not so concerned about structure. I think what's really important is that the structure is aligned with your objectives at that given time. And you could possibly be more fluid than folks might expect. I think there's some sort of sense that a real hard-lined, hard-structured organization may give you more ability to get things done. But I would say that I'm seeing more of that fall apart, right? So if you look at really top-notch, high-performing organizations right now, a lot of them are based on what I would call the ensemble method. So, even if you're at GE and, big company, it's a series of high-performing teams that deliver projects. And they bring in cross disciplines, they bring in people from different parts of the company to get things done. And it's not the formal hierarchy and the silo that's getting things delivered. It's these cross-functional teams that can, gather quickly. And, I like it. I think marketers love it too, because it's a little bit more like what you'd see in major motion picture production, where, hundreds of people have to come in together quickly, tell a story, have an economic outcome, disband, maybe get together for the next project, maybe not. And I think that's the model we're going to see more of.
It seems like that's the model of the way the world works now, more and more. So it's interesting that you guys adopted that type of approach.
Yeah, it's a great thing to get comfortable with. I mean, I think a lot of nervousness is about not being comfortable with that model.
Right.
Okay, well, what if I have to, work with a different team next time, or I have a different role on that team,
right.
Or the story is completely different than any story I've ever told. It's like, well, of course that's how it's going to be.
Right. Is there, this is kind of going off script a little bit, but is there one or two things that you think of that make a great team? Sure.
So when I think of great teams, I think of a real mix of capabilities and skill sets. The teams that I've been on that have been the most effective, one, everyone is deeply, deeply committed to the idea and the project that we're getting done. I think also structurally there's some truth to the fact that the best team can't get the thing done if they don't have the right kind of permission and decision rights and executive sponsorship. So that's an important piece, of course. But if you look at the teams themselves, and this is one of the reasons why I love all the work that companies are doing now in diversity and inclusion, because obviously gender and race is one form of, or are forms of diversity, but economic background, academic background, the way you solve problems, whether you're an extrovert or introvert, whether you're very technical or very quantitative, these things are the real source of diversity. And the best teams have folks that represent all these different skill sets, and they come together and they're very respectful of each other. They challenge each other because they value the project. It's not necessarily the most polite of cultures, but they enjoy the challenging nature of working with people that are really good, and they are there to learn and get something really done. And those are great teams.
Well, so switching gears a little bit, Aon has a huge history of acquisitions, and you guys made a rather large bet, I think a couple of times, on sports being in your marketing mix. I know you've told this story probably 1,000 times at this point, but I'd love you to tell it one more, in terms of how you came about the partnership with Manchester United, and how did that deliver on your expectations?
Well, when we first did Manchester United, it came up at a really opportune moment for the firm. And it was right when we were having that brand discussion I mentioned earlier. And our CEO, our executive committee across the board, was committed to changing the organization from something where only about 30% of the firm was going to market as pure Aon. Then there was about another 30% that had Aon somewhere in the title, might be called something, and then say an Aon company. And then there was a huge portion of the company that was going to market as brands that we had acquired. They had never switched over. And we believed that there was a tremendous amount of value that could be unlocked if we could get the firm to act as one. Certainly that would be global presence and brand presence, meaning rather than distributing all our resources across multiple brands that would struggle to get attention, we could have one brand that would get all the resources. So when we're promoting it in New Zealand, ideally, it's kind of helping you, in Indiana, because it's the same brand rather than a separate one. But there's also notions of cross-selling. Rather than just bringing the product or solution that you sold in the previous company, you can bring all of Aon to the client, which meant that you could be much more helpful to clients. There's also cost structure. When you take away brand names, it's amazing how quickly folks realize that maybe they have redundant cost structures and they don't need their separate IT organization and their separate finance organization. And so basically, we thought we could unlock billions of dollars by getting our company to work as one. And I was really working to build a marketing organization that could accomplish that. Again, 120 countries. Imagine trying to build a marketing organization, an advertising budget, an advertising campaign that would bring our brand up to a stature that people felt like that was what they wanted to rally around. And that was pretty expensive. To be honest, I mean, again, just do the math, right? Imagine hiring 5 people, and then if you gave someone $1 million per country for advertising, what could you expect out of that in Germany, right? Is that going to be much of a dent? Are you really going to get much of a brand exposure? So you kind of go, we were lockstead, completely focused on having a global brand at the time. The alternatives for how we might do it were fairly expensive and had a lot of risk, because I didn't believe that we would execute well in 120 places simultaneously with local advertising campaigns. Then you come along with something like Manchester United, which is one check, a portion of the cost of the other marketing that we were just discussing. And it was something that everyone could understand. I mean, the U.S. being the exception, being that soccer was a little bit more exotic there. But this is a conversation we can have in Japan again, and South Africa, and Australia, New Zealand. Everyone gets the notion of soccer/football, and so these things added up. We had a couple of other benefits. One was we were very close to AIG, who was in a really unfortunate situation at the time, and they had the shirt sponsorship of Manchester United. And so we had a really intimate knowledge of how successful it had been for them. As soon as AIG started to not be able to do it, I was getting calls from field reps in places all over the world saying, hey, if they can't do that, we should really look at it, which is the kind of field validation that you rarely get when you are making a big brand sports marketing type decision.
Right.
So for me, it was really counterintuitive because I had no familiarity with the sport. I didn't have an inclination to believe in sports marketing. I think I'd been much more about campaign-led and very measured brand marketing, and sports marketing just seemed to be in this big world of almost unstructured return and a bit of a boondoggle. But as I did a really rigorous study of it and did the ROI, it was pretty clear that it was the best answer for us. And the only reason not to do it was that it was sports marketing. Might be considered a little bit less structured, but you could just see how it would work. So the good news is it's been phenomenal for us, and all the quantitative expectations and goals that we set were definitely matched. And I've also become a fan of sports marketing, and I think one of the things that we're learning right now is how the brain actually behaves and absorbs new information and moves your brand from one part of the brain to the other. And sport carries that very quickly. It brings your brand into the thought process in a different way than articles or content does. It has an emotional experience with it, and that's the magic ingredient that helps you reposition where you're filed away in the brain of your client or customer. And without emotion, you stay in the exact same place. This is just brain science. It's just technical stuff. That it's actually the emotional stir that allows the brain to think about you in a different way. And that's why great creative is always so important, and sport really triggers that. So it is as complex as the organization, right? How you end up using a sponsorship like Manchester United, but it was fantastic for us to have one thing we could use everywhere in the world. Small team, centrally located, could orchestrate programs in 120 countries as a result. So, we had 7 people running that program globally.
Well, and as you said before, if it's good, people will use it. So I think he delivered on that with Manchester United.
And that is more jazz, right?
Right.
In Colombia or Brazil, some of the things that they've done with the program have been amazing with their clients.
So now you guys have continued to acquire. I don't know if it's slowed down at all, but I'm curious. More importantly, how can CMOs contribute to that integration or acculturation process? In the M&A.
Oh yeah, I think it's one of the more valuable things that we do. I was at a meeting of CMOs recently, and I asked for a show of hands about midway through the conversation, just out of curiosity, how many of you have been through a merger and acquisition in the last 5 years? And 80% of the room raised their hand. And it is a consistently underestimated part of our marketing mix is how to deal with mergers and acquisitions. And just the sheer law of numbers means that quite often you're not going to be the brand that is going to win out in that, right? There are a few brands that are doing the acquiring, and they swallow up a lot of brands. So people have to deal with this and really understand it quite frequently. I think what marketers do and what marketing can do is be very aware of the fact that we are giving people the sense of identity for the firm. When they walk in the door and they think about what does their company stand for, the marketing organization is helping them understand that. If you went to the extreme, you could say it's telling them what to think about the firm. If they're doing it credibly, it works. If they're doing it in a way that's disingenuous and not credible, it won't work. But marketers always have to understand that they're giving people the glue. They're giving them the culture. They're giving them what they stand for. And good CEOs, I think, in M&A situations really understand that, and they lean heavily on their marketing teams. I see that over and over.
So I want to transition and talk a little bit more just about you, kind of stepping back from the job and what you've been working on. And I love to ask this question, which is, is what moment in your life do you believe defines who you are today? Very deep.
Wow.
I think it says a lot.
Yeah. It's I cannot, and it probably says a lot about me too, that I could not think of one moment. I can think of things that have mattered. I can think of accomplishments that have been very rewarding. For example, my family moving to Seattle as a kid, and my dad having been a real Midwestern guy, and us going out to a place and living there from 1970 to 1980, a time when brands like Starbucks and Microsoft were just getting started, and a culture that was going to give birth to Costco and Amazon and Nike. And I think I learned a great deal about marketing, for example, just through the culture that was around me at that time. And then, look, there are things that define us that are oftentimes the hardest things that we go through. And, the times when we're tested and we really find out who we are. And I've had a series of those in my life. And I think you just come back to the fact that we are evolving. I mean, I hope that there is no single moment in my life that can define me, because I'm absorbing those experiences and hopefully getting better and moving on and meeting great people and accomplishing great things collectively. Right? That's kind of the hope in a real positive community. So that's a really hard question for me to answer. I'm sorry, Alan.
No. Well, I mean, if I play armchair psychologist here, there's something that comes through in all of what you've talked about, and I think it might be highlighted in that move that you described, which is kind of your embrace of fluidity or embrace of change. So, for what it's worth, maybe your moment is a series of moments, like you said. So. Pretty interesting.
See, I got some good insight today, as always. Thank you.
So the next question, also a little personal, but what motivates you? What makes you get up in the morning?
I do wake up curious. I always have the thing I want to find out that day. I love working with people. I've had times where I've had really extended private working projects where you were literally in a cubicle for 12 hours and very research based, and I can do that, but I can't do it for more than 3 months because I really like working with people, and I think those interactions motivate me. And watching people get together and try to accomplish something together, I get a lot of energy from that. I
find that marketers are kind of students of marketing. At times we kind of look at it all around us. So I don't know are there any brands or companies or even causes that you think other people should be taking notice of or have made you kind of stop and notice what they're doing?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the folks that are really committed to this profession really are students, right? We're looking at everything. We look at advertisements. We look at the way things happen. If we're doing a 5K race, what's on the T-shirt? How's the bag registration go? Just everything all the time. And I'm actually really working on studying some brands, and I think some brands that really grew out of the Northwest in that period that I mentioned from 1970 to 1995, and what are the cornerstones of growth mentality. And of course, the great one that was founded in 95 that came out of that 25-year period is Amazon. And I just can't learn enough about Amazon. And I love the fact that they say that they don't market, when in fact everything they're doing is marketing. And they're not advertising in any traditional way. But in a world where you can kind of circumnavigate the TV and magazines and everything and just have a direct experience with your customer, that's your marketing. And I think anyone not studying Amazon right now in depth is really missing a trick. Salesforce.com would be another one, just great companies. And then looking at how do companies like IBM, GE, Coca-Cola reinvent themselves over and over and over. And I think it is good to look at the leaders to figure out things that you might want to emulate. As well as, I think, look, Alan, you and I learned a lot from Bell & Howell, right? I mean, at one time it was one of the top companies in the world. It was extraordinarily well positioned. And I think a management philosophy that was going for kind of breaking up and making the most out of its parts, rather than a long-term focus on its brand, obviously had an impact. And that's something that we really can learn from.
No, I agree. I totally agree. So last question, you have to get out your crystal ball. And I'm curious what you think the future of marketing holds.
I think that marketing is going to increasingly become more about the problem solving in people's minds and the way that the problem is solved. So, traditionally when we talked about marketing, we went straight to advertising because, most of the problems marketers were asked to solve had to do with publicity, promotion, people being familiar with. Then we got a little bit into marketing strategy, and we started to talk about pricing and more strategy, frameworks and working with things of that nature and customer information. I think that where we are now is particularly because everything's so transparent in the world and you can't hide. These channels are becoming less the focus of marketing, and the problem that you're solving is becoming more the focus. So, a company at a certain time might need leads. A company at a certain time might need branding work. Another time it might need reputational work because it's having problems in the community or with regulators or something like that. And these things are going to be, you can imagine any year in a given decade. Well, this might be a strong brand year, a low lead gen year, or this might be an all lead gen year, no brand year. We may need to be focused on reputational issues. As that mix changes, all your methods and all the things that you do and all the things that your team organizes around can change. And I suspect that we're going to see more conversation about the challenges we're facing rather than a focus which we've had traditionally, which has been on great advertising, great PR, great lead gen, because we've been focused on the channels versus the problems that we're solving.
That's great. That's great. Well, Phil, thank you so much for coming on. It's been enlightening.
Well, it's always great to talk about the profession. You don't oftentimes get to step out and kind of take a view on the big picture. So I always enjoy whenever we get together chatting with you about it. So thank you.
Marketing Today is brought to you by Atomic. Atomic focuses on unleashing the growth potential for clients we serve. Atomic is a strategic consultancy specializing in business, marketing, brand, and innovation. Our singular goal is to help you accelerate your efforts with the right mix of expertise, analysis, and creativity. Check us out at atomic.com, ATOMCK.com. Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me, with project management by Sarah Williams, audio production by Aaron Campbell, writing and editing by Kevin Greeley, social media support by Megan Woods, art and graphic design by Sarah Dell. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about the show. We love to hear from listeners at info@atomic, ATOMCK.com. I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.